All right. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. I want to welcome all of you to this IFORS global webinar today on OR and sustainability. So before we start, I'd just like to take a few minutes to introduce and remind everyone about IFORS. As you may know, first, housekeeping.
That's me, Jenny.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. My name's Gavin Blackett. I'm the new IFORS Secretary. Just so that you know, for today's session, we'll have a question and answer session after all four of the speakers have completed their presentations. If you want to submit a question for any or all of our speakers, please do so using the question and answer box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. In addition to your name, please indicate where you're from, to whom your question is directed, and then obviously the question just itself. If you need to use the chat feature, you can communicate with either your fellow attendees or with the organisers. Okay, thank you.
All right. So again, I just want to welcome everyone to this webinar. The IFORS, as you may know, is the International Federation of OR Society, where our members are the national societies of different countries. Our aim is to promote operations research worldwide, both in methodology and practice. We were formed in 1959, and now we have over 50 national societies and close to 30,000 individual members. IFORS is separated into 4 different regional groupings, with the 54 member societies. We have a series of activities where we promote operations research, including summer support for students for summer and winter schools, and several other key initiatives that I'll mention next. The IFORS business is jointly run by administrative committee, which will have representatives from all the 4 regions. Okay, so our one major conference is our triennial conference, and this year it will be happening in July, Santiago, and everybody is obviously invited to attend. Another major initiative, I think, is publications. We have 2 journals. International Transactions of OR and Sustainability Analytics and Modeling, which you will hear some more soon. And in addition to the journals, we also have a newsletter, which is electronic. And I encourage you all to go to the IFORS website and subscribe, where you will read about activities that are going on worldwide. And of course, our key another major initiative is our global webinars, which has been started for a couple of years. And with that, I'll hand over to our host, our Vice President, Professor Fritz Bismarck.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you. Also from my side, sincere welcome to all attendees. My name is Fritz Pieksma. This global webinar is one in a series of webinars organized by IFORS. You can see the previous ones on the slide. And of course, you're very welcome to have a look at any of these. Now, this global webinar, as you see on the slide, is on sustainability, a critical subject of our times, I would say. And of course, operations research is very well equipped to help facing the challenges that center around making our society sustainable. IFORS actually publishes a journal on this, Sustainability Analytics and Modeling. And I'm very glad that the editor-in-chief, Elise Miller-Hooks, is here to say a few words on the journal. Elise.
Great. So this journal is published between IFORS and Elsevier, and the journal's goals are to tackle global challenges with analytics, mathematical modeling, and operations research. Next slide. Its goals are to publish papers that develop and apply quantitative methods of analytics in OR to our many global sustainability challenges. And they were quite broad the way we see them. They span from climate and disaster risk management through health, energy, economies, well-being, equity, and so forth. Next. So the journal's articles contribute to global sustainability efforts in many areas. And here's just some examples from greening manufacturing and supply chains, creating metrics for sustainability in healthcare, sustainable waste management, predicting air quality, and much more. And currently we have 3 ongoing, or 1 that's about to be posted, special issue, building resilience for a world in distress, analytics for sustainable logistics and transportation technologies toward sustainability and resilience in transportation systems. We have 3 and numerous that you can see that we published in a variety of areas. We always have new ideas coming in, and we welcome your ideas for special issues. And you can also send your papers in as regular non-special issue papers. So we welcome you and hope that you recognize that this journal is ours. It belongs to all of us, and we are using it to try to make a difference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Elise. It's time to introduce the speakers. In fact, it's time to introduce the first speaker, Adrian Ramirez Navarrete. He's the head of the Department of Industrial Engineering in the Western region at Tec de Monterrey. He received a PhD from Arizona State. He holds a master from Tec de Monterrey and a bachelor from the University of Sorona. His work includes applications of optimization and simulation methods in bike sharing systems, in port logistics, and charging stations for electric vehicles. And his work has been published in Production Operations Management, Decision Sciences, International Journal of Production Economics, European Journal of OR, and others. I'm very glad that he's here, and I'm looking forward to his talk on electric vehicles in Mexico, the adoption and challenges from an OR perspective. Adrian, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Fritz, for the introduction, and thanks, IFORS, for the invitation. Well, I'm excited to talk about a little bit of my work that I've been doing in recent years with some of my colleagues in Mexico, and also with some students. So we are going to discuss about some challenges about the adoption of electric vehicles in Mexico and from an OR's perspective. So we will discuss the part of charging infrastructure, but also some barriers for the adoption of electric vehicles in Mexico. So this work has been in collaboration with some of my students, Javier Garavito, which is a bachelor in engineering in computational science at Tec de Monterrey. Francisco Ruiz is a PhD student at Universidad Panamericana. Hugo Briceño, Elias Olivares, they are professors at Universidad Panamericana here in Mexico. And Osgur Aras is also a colleague I have been working with. He's a professor at University of Nebraska in Lincoln. So let me talk about Mexico. If you have never been here, so I suggest come and visit us. So Mexico has a population of about 126 million inhabitants. It's the 15th largest economy in the world, and it's also a large manufacturer of vehicles. About 25 million of units have been produced in Mexico since 2016. And also it's the average number of vehicles, new vehicles that are sold per year is about 1.28 million. So it's a large market for vehicles, so for producing vehicles, but also for the sales. So we're interested in, especially in the electric vehicles in Mexico. So, but when we say electric vehicles, what do we mean? So in the literature and different sources, you will find that sometimes electric vehicles are referred to 3 types of vehicles or engines. So we have the hybrid electric vehicle, which has a gasoline-based engine, but also a battery that recharges itself while the vehicle is in motion. We also have the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which consist of an internal combustion engine unit, but also a battery-based engine. So these kind of vehicles needs gas, but also it needs to be recharged using the electric grid. And also we have the most well-known battery electric vehicle, which it has a pure electric motor, and it must be recharged using the electric grid. So we will discuss some parts of the 3 vehicles, but also we will also focus on the part of the battery electric vehicle. So I guess that you have seen these type of charts many times. So the number of vehicles that are on the roads around the world have been increasing in the last decade. So about 16.5 million electric vehicles were on the road on 2021, according to this report, the EV Outlook 2022. And most of them are located in China, Europe, and the United States. So in developing country as Mexico, we also have an increasing trend, but the numbers are not that large yet. So let me show you about Mexico. So you can see here the number of units sold between 2016 and 2022. You will see that this also has been increasing, especially in the last couple of years, 2021 and 2022. However, most of these vehicles, including hybrids and battery-based, most of these vehicles that have been sold in Mexico are hybrid electric vehicles, those that do not need to be recharged in the electric grid. While the plug-in electric, hybrid electric vehicle and the battery-based also are increasing, but at a smaller rate than the hybrid electric. So about 184,000 hybrid and electric vehicles were sold in Mexico between 2016 and 2022. However, as I mentioned, about 87% were hybrid electric, while about 8% pure plug-in hybrid and about 4.4% were battery-based. So this accounts about, in the last couple of years, about 4.7% of all cars that have been sold in Mexico, new cars that have been sold. So about 4.6, 4.7 are hybrid all electric vehicles. So you can see this increasing trend in the adoption, and the top 10 states that have been selling more of these vehicles are especially those with a large GDP, with a larger development than the rest of the country, and actually they also are the largest metro areas in the country. So Mexico City, the state of Mexico that surrounds Mexico City, Jalisco, and Nuevo León are the states with the largest adoption rate of hybrid and electric vehicles. So what are some pros of adopting electric vehicles in Mexico, including hybrid? Well, they are exempt from new car tax. Also, the owner can install an additional electricity meter for a charging station at home. So they are also exempt from paying some ownership tax, but that varies by state because it's a state tax. They are also exempt from the environmental verification, exempt from circulation restriction. There are discounts in toll roads, and also preferential parkings for some of them with and without charging stations. So how about the charging infrastructure? So you will see that it's the number of stations in the country is around 1,200 stations. Most of them are located in large urban areas. So that's also a challenge, right? So the infrastructure is also increasing, but still it may be difficult to complete some trips. And that's one part that we will discuss in this talk. So other factors that must be considered when people adopt electric vehicles is about the sustainable part. So most of the owners adopt an electric vehicle trying to reduce the emissions. But how about the charging part? Well, we know that in Mexico, about 30% of the energy is generated from renewable sources. So that means that about 70% is still based on fossils, and they produce some emissions. Also, another important factor in Mexico is that well, it's actually the same in the world. So it's the upfront price of the electric vehicle. So you can see here. One of the most popular brands in Mexico is Nissan. So you can see that a vehicle, if we compare the price of an electric vehicle versus an internal combustion engine vehicle about the same model, so we will see that the electric vehicle costs about 3 times the price of the internal combustion engine. So, and also we will see that some vehicles, or most vehicles in the market, have a low range. So that might cause this problem of range anxiety of the driver. So we will discuss first these some challenges in the adoption of the electric vehicles in Mexico. This work was published in the Socioeconomic Planning Sciences Journal in 2021. So for that, we developed a model to try to explain the adoption of hybrid and electric vehicles. So here we included hybrids also between 2016 and 2019. For that, we developed a green indicator. This indicator is a function that returns an indicator between 0 and 1, which consider other, let's say, sustainable practices that we found in the Statistic Bureau. So for instance, we consider the sustainability certificates given to industry because of their sustainable practices. If they have friendly sustainable practices, they receive these kind of certificates. The energy intensity, that means then the amount of energy needed to produce 1 million in GDP. The adequate disposal of solid waste and waste separation. These are based on surveys to homes in this service used by the Statistic Bureau. So we also consider the gasoline price between 2017 and 2019, the electricity costs, the GDP per capita, and also the education of the inhabitants. So basically we did this analysis by state, considering the 32 states in Mexico. So we found some important correlations between the sales of hybrid and electric vehicles and also these variables included in this green indicator. So we see kind of a strong correlation with the waste disposal, with the energy intensity, and with the green indicator too. So we can see some correlation between these, the sales and some other sustainable indices, but also with other economic indices, especially with the GDP per capita and also the educational level of the population in each state. So for this, we did an econometric analysis to identify the effect of these independent variables on the sale of hybrid and electric vehicles. We developed an ordinary least square model using the log functional form. And so we constructed several models by adding and removing variables. And for each model, we tested for normality and independence of error, homoscedasticity and correct specificity. So in the first model, we included all the variables. However, we observed that an outlier in a state, which caused the normality test to fail. And in addition, we observed the design of some variables wasn't expected due to the multicollinearity. In the second model, we removed the outlier and the education variable, which was highly correlated with the GDP in this model, and all the independent variables were significant at 10% level. And this model is able to explain about 75% of the variability of sales across the state of Mexico. And in the third model, we only use the green indicator and one economic variable, the GDP. So this model explains 59% of the variability on the EV sales across the states. And the fourth model uses only the economic variables. And the results are similar to those found in model 2. Model 5 shows the variables selected using stepwise regression. So this model is able to explain 68% of the variability in the sales. So in general, we can see that economic factors and the green indicator are able to explain between 60% and 75% of the variability of the sales. In addition, we observed that most significant factors are the GDP per capita, the cost of electricity, and the green indicator. And according to Model 2, an increase of 1% of the GDP per capita leads to an increase of about 1% in the sales of hybrid and electric vehicles, while an increase of 1% in the green indicator will lead to an increase between 0.5 and 1.07% on the sales of hybrid and electric vehicles. So these are some of the results that we published in this paper in the Socioeconomic Planning Sciences. And also, well, here I want to pay attention to this part. So we have also data from a home and environment survey in 2017 by INEGI. So in this survey, about 69.1% of the people say that they would be willing to change their internal combustion engine vehicle by a hybrid or electric. However, in the same survey, 56% of the people answered that they had never bought a vehicle. So, and considering those that bought a vehicle in the past, 44%, 45% answered that they base their election on price, and 28% base their election on energy efficiency. So basically, we found the consumers in Mexico are willing to adopt a hybrid and electric vehicle, especially influenced by this environmental factor, but still the economic factor is important. So most of them would prefer maybe a vehicle that they can afford. So, so we are almost running out of time with my presentation. So let me discuss this very briefly in a couple of minutes. So we also analyzed the charging infrastructure in Mexico using simulation. As we said, there are relatively few chargers if we consider the territory of Mexico, and most of them are in urban areas. So we were interested in what about if we want to travel to other cities, so perform interurban travel. First, we found that most electric vehicles sold in Mexico have low range, also related with the past paper. So most of them are have a relatively low price and they are more affordable. So they have low range, and it could be difficult to, but they would be difficult to perform a trip to another city. So basically, we modeled or we simulated traveling to another city. So in this particular paper that we published in Winter Sim Simulation, we simulated a two-way trip between Guadalajara, the city where I live, and Mexico City, which is about 535 kilometers, and there are only 3 fast chargers in the road. So let me skip some of this material. So I want to pay attention to the results. Basically, we found that what we expected about there would be some fraction of vehicles that would not be able to complete their trip, so about 4.3%. And however, the current waiting time, if we consider the capacity of those chargers, wouldn't be that problem in the current state because the number of vehicles sold in Mexico are relatively low. But still, if we increase the number of vehicles on the road, that would become a problem. So basically, we are adding additional stations to the system, and we realized that, okay, most vehicles will be able to complete their trip charging more frequently, but we need to pay attention to the capacity of the chargers, right? Because at some point, if we add additional stations, that would create more demand on the next or the nearest stations for that. And we will need to consider that shift on bottleneck if we want to define a good strategy to deploy charging stations. So basically, in the current work that we have now, it's extending this to the whole country. And just to show you the last slide, basically, under the current circumstances, if we now add, in this case, we added more realistic assumptions. Most of the time in the road for the vehicles, cars will be waiting or charging. So, and in Mexico, that's particularly important because we have a large demand for interurban travels in private vehicles. So with this, I finished my presentation, and thank you, Fritz.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Thank you for a very nice and interesting talk about the situation in Mexico and the adoption. Let me shortly mention to the participants, if you have questions for Adrian, you can type them in the Q&A box and we'll address them after all the presenters have presented the work. Allow me to introduce the next speaker, Michael Frege. Michael is an assistant professor at the University of Michigan, and he holds a position both in the School for Environment and Sustainability, as well as in the Department of Industrial and Operations Engineering. His lab researches how to equitably reduce global and local environmental impacts of energy systems while making those systems at the same time robust to future climate change. He has received funding from various sources and gotten a career award from the US National Science Foundation. I'm going to give him the floor. The title of his presentation is hopefully the value techno-economic analysis of small modular reactors decarbonizing industrial process heat. Thank you. Michael, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay, Fritz?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to be here. And it's great to be speaking with all of you. Thank you for being here. I am Michael Craig, like you just heard, but this research was led by one of my PhD students, Max Venata, and so all the credit for the research is him. I'll defer all the hard questions to him, but I'll take all the softballs that you throw at me. And so this talk is about small modular reactors and how we can scale up this technology. So let's talk about what these SMRs are. And while this is going to be about nuclear at first, I promise there will be optimization coming in soon. So small modular reactors, they're an emerging nuclear technology. There are none of these in commercial operations anywhere as far as I know, at least in the United States, but there are lots of companies designing different types of these reactors. The image on the right is from NuScale, one of the furthest along companies. And the idea basically is we love nuclear power. It's carbon-free emissions. It's pretty reliable, but building those large reactors can be very costly and expensive and difficult, especially today. And so let's take that concept and just make it much smaller. Instead of building a 1 gigawatt facility, let's build a facility that's 30 megawatts or 100 megawatts or up to 300 megawatts. And so the idea behind this is if we design these reactors for mass manufacturing, for modularity, for flexible operations, all of these things will reduce costs of these reactors. And important to our work is lots of these SMRs have steam and working fluids between 300 and 850 degrees Celsius. So we want to take these SMRs and we want to help decarbonize with them. And one place where we think they can be a really nice tool for decarbonization is in the industrial sector. On the left-hand side here, we have the International Energy Agency, what they say decarbonization trajectories need to look like across different sectors. The yellow line there is industry. You can see it's around 7 gigatons CO2 right now. By 2050, that's supposed to be approaching zero. So according to the International Energy Agency and the IPCC and other global reports, we've got a lot of decarbonization to do in the industrial sector. And yet, when you look at what pledges have been in terms of reducing industrial fuel use, in general, industrial output is increasing, not decreasing. And you can see in terms of the fuels, coal is decreasing slightly, natural gas is remaining constant. We've got a big chunk of oil there. Basically, what people are saying they're going to do in industry is not aligned with these decarbonization trajectories we need in industry. So we need something else to help us get there. And so we think small modular reactors can be that technology or one of the technologies. And the reason for that is there are a lot of industrial heat facilities that need temperatures below 850 degrees Celsius. Remember, I told you SMRs have thermal outputs between 300 and 850 degrees Celsius. And so any industrial heat applications in that area might be good applications and might be decarbonized by small modular reactors. And so what we're going to focus on in this paper are going to be industrial heat processes below 850 degrees Celsius and that are served by natural gas. So why we care about those, I want to show you what industrial heat looks like in our two study regions, Texas, which is ERCOT, and the Southwest Power Pool, in particular, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota in the United States. So this is a big swath of states right in the middle of the country. And what we're going to look at are thermal demands and temperature requirements for facilities that report to the Environmental Protection Agency. So we've got two different groups of bar plots here. The top is those Texas facilities. The bottom is those Southwest Power Pool facilities. The y-axis labels are different industrial sectors. So we've got ethyl alcohol production. We've got organic chemicals. We've got petrochemicals, refining. And then in terms of the two columns, the left is how much temperature or the thermal demand. And on the right, it's again thermal demand. And we've differentiated here temperatures on the left from fuels on the right. So what I just want to highlight here is the red bars, which is what really matters here. There's lots of industrial heat consumption happening in Texas and in the Southwest Power Pool, and the temperature ranges that SMRs can serve, 300 to 850 degrees Celsius. And a lot of those facilities, if we look at the right, all those orange bars, those are all being served by natural gas. And so we're going to just focus in on getting rid of natural gas with small modular reactors in this particular heat segment. So our research question is, can SMRs provide a profitable means of decarbonizing industrial thermal demands? And if we participate in industry and wholesale markets, does that improve our profitability at all? And so we're going to evaluate this question across several different market conditions. We're going to look at over 300 industrial facility processes across 11 different industrial segments. And we're going to look at 5 different types of small modular reactors, ranging from pressurized water reactors to high temperature gas reactors. And so where the optimization comes in here is our main analytical tool for understanding the deployment of SMRs here. So we're going to have a mixed integer linear program. This model is going to figure out what type of SMR should I build at this facility, how many should I build, and how does it operate on an hourly basis over an entire year. And we're going to do this operational optimization for thermal output to the industrial facility and to electricity output to the power sector. And so this figure here in the bottom right is showing us these different loops within the SMR, the thermal loops and the electricity output loops. Our model is going to account for capital, fixed, and variable O&M costs. We're going to have fuel costs in there, and we're going to have wholesale electricity revenues in there. And as we'll see, what we're going to do is compare our results to existing natural gas consumption post-optimization. So we'll see that. And we've got lots of constraints in this model. One of those constraints is we're going to force the model to build a reactor at each industrial facility in order to totally decarbonize it. So by doing this, we're going to see this is the best SMR type for this facility, and we're then going to back out the economic viability of forcing that reactor to be built there. And we've got lots of other engineering constraints in there governing the internal operations of the small modular reactor, the relationship between thermal output and electricity output, and other factors. We're going to make some simplifying assumptions here. We're going to ignore some really detailed internal reactor dynamics like xenon poisoning. We're going to assume our small modular reactors are price takers, which means we're going to take exogenous time series of electricity prices and optimize our revenues based on those, assuming we do not affect them. So each of these very small modular reactors, they're a very small part of the overall market. Us participating in the wholesale market does not change prices. We're also going to have no retrofit costs for the industrial facility. We're only going to capture the capital costs for the small modular reactor. And we're going to take the reported and estimated costs for SMRs. None of these have been commercially built. These costs will evolve. They will change. They're still speculative in many cases. We did the best that we can, combing lots of different literature, gray literature and peer-reviewed literature. And so we've got a really good sense of what the current estimates of costs are. We're just going to go with those. All right, so what I'm going to show you are typically break-even natural gas prices. So I want to walk through a sample set of results to show you where we're getting these values from so you understand what they mean as we look at them. So on the right-hand side, what we have is the cost and the revenue breakdown for one type of SMR reactor, a molten salt reactor, at a 100 megawatt thermal facility requiring 220 degrees Celsius thermal input. So we build this SMR because our model forces it to build one type of reactor. The model chooses MSRs as the best option. And so when we build the reactor, we have this huge capital cost incurred of, in this case, $46 million. We have other costs accruing as well. And so all these costs of fixed O&M, variable O&M, fuel costs for the reactor amount to $72 million that you are in the hole. So you've just spent $72 million to get this SMR in place and to use it. If I'm participating in wholesale markets, we found that this reactor could make 16 million back from there. And so from the perspective of the industrial facility, I'm still having a net loss in my revenue of $55.6 million. So what we're going to quantify is a break-even avoided natural gas price. And this tells us if natural gas prices were $15 per MMBTU, that would make up for that red bar on the right-hand side. And this facility would break even. And so that value is going to translate to this part of the curve, where on the x-axis we have natural gas cost. Here we're showing you how high do natural gas costs have to be before the facility, circled in red, has SMR economic viability. And so the y-axis there is facility demand being served by SMRs. So we're going to look through a few different curves like that. Again, the x-axis here is my avoided natural gas price. How high does natural gas need to be before my SMR makes sense economically? And on the y-axis, in this case, again, it's our facility demand in megawatt hours thermal. And so we've got several different curves here. 5 of the curves are the different SMR types because we're looking at all 5 different types of reactors. The brown curve at the top is all reactors together. And so you can see, well, we can look at, let's take $8 per MMBTU, which is above what natural gas prices are right now. At $8 per MMBTU, you can decarbonize with SMRs about 14% of industrial demand in this region. Natural gas prices have to reach $6 per MMBTU in order for SMRs to be deployed at all. We can look at how many modules that builds us. We've got modules on the order of 150 across all these. If we go up to say $40 per MMBTU, at that $8 value, we've got 26 modules. And we can also look at how much capacity of SMRs we've built. And again, it's roughly 5.4 gigawatt thermal from our SMRs at that $8 value. Now, this is all without participating in wholesale markets, but like lots of other cogen facilities, I could participate in wholesale markets as well. And what we find is that selling electricity into wholesale markets increases feasibility. We get more built, but it doesn't reduce the natural gas price at which you start to see SMR investments. And so we've still got this price of about $6.50 per MMBTU before SMRs start to be built at all in Texas. Now, what explains our results? In our paper, we walk through two different factors, thermal quality and thermal quantity matching. I'm just going to focus on the thermal quality. And here, thermal quality means, does the reactor provide the temperature that the facility needs? And so I've got two different sets of plots. The left column is $8 per MMBTU natural gas price. The right is $16. And we've got our two regions, Texas and the Southwest Power Pool. You can see the colors there correspond to different types of SMRs. And in general, there's a strong relationship with the temperature that the facility needs and the type of SMR built. And that is because, for instance, some of these reactor types don't get into these higher temperature bands that industrial facilities need. So we've got two different competing interests here. Get the right temperature for the facility, get the right sizing for the facility, and those two are really interacting to drive our results. We can look not at Texas, but now at Southwest Power Pool, slightly different industrial composition. And so we can here look at a higher natural gas price. Let's take current, or as of 2021, EU natural gas prices. Those were very high of $16 per MMBTU. And there, if you get those very high natural gas prices, we start to see lots of demand being able to served economically by SMRs. In this case, about 76% of our thermal demand in this region can be served by SMRs at that very high price. We can see that microreactors, that red line in the middle of the plot there, microreactors are doing a lot of this work, but we've also got participation from high temperature gas reactors and from other types. We can again look at installed modules and SMR feasible capacity. We're building over 100 modules here with about 7.5 gigawatts of modules being built. If we, again, look at participating in wholesale markets alongside industrial facilities, then we get some interesting results happening with this particular SMR type, the molten salt reactor, actually being economically viable today. And so with those 2021 prices that it could have purchased, we can have facilities start to decarbonize without having to exceed current natural gas costs. And so that's pretty great. And we can see that there can be lots of deployment in that case. We tested a bunch of sensitivities. We looked at different carbon prices, different operational parameters for SMRs, including thermal energy storage at that facility, and increasing our SMR capital cost estimates by up to 100%. You can find more details about these figures in the paper, but in general, I'd say our results are pretty robust across these different scenarios. Higher costs reduce economic viability, but not by a significant amount, and carbon pricing makes SMRs a little more attractive. So in conclusion, we found that there are some SMR types, in particular molten salt reactors, if you believe the current estimates for their cost today, that can be economically viable at some facilities in the Southwest Power Pool, but really widespread adoption is not economically viable yet. It would require either higher natural gas prices, lower SMR costs, or other sorts of interventions like carbon prices. We've got these two different types of reactors being the most economically viable, but there are lots of different ways in which these different types of reactors can participate. If we see very high natural gas prices, we've got more of our market that can be served. And I'll just mention that the Inflation Reduction Act was passed in the United States recently. There can be lots of provisions in there that benefit small modular reactors, which can make this even better. So that's all I have. This work was funded by the Idaho National Lab and by the Department of Energy. And thank you so much. And I'd be happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael, for sharing this fascinating story about small modular reactors. It was great to hear. Again, indeed, questions at the end of all speakers, and type them in the Q&A box, please. Let's move on with our third presentation of today, Kristen Schell. Kristen works at improving wind energy resource assessments and forecasting, and is also working at designing adaptable microgrids that can respond to future climate events. She has contributed to advancing spatiotemporal statistical forecast models, learning architectures, and energy system network optimization. Her work has been funded by various organizations, and I'm very much looking forward to her talk that has as a title, Optimizing Power Systems to Support Civil and Social Infrastructure Recovery. Kirsten, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
Thank you very
cool.
much.
Okay, please go
Okay.
ahead.
Sure. So as Fritz mentioned, the title of my talk is looking at optimizing power systems, specifically to support both civil and social infrastructure recovery after extreme events. So this work was done in conjunction with my student and two colleagues who are at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. So I'll be going over the motivation for why we undertook this study, the detailed database that we used for this work, the advancements on the modeling efforts, which were in power generation and looking at the microgrid network for this community, as well as the extreme event scenarios that we put on the microgrid to test the viability of the different power generation options. The method that we used is what we call crisis, the civil restoration with interdependent social infrastructure systems models. It's a restoration optimization model. The goal of that model is to optimally restore the civil infrastructure systems like transport and road networks, as well as the power system network, so that we're maximizing the performance of the social systems that they support. So the main results from this study are looking at what is the optimal power generation portfolio according to the expected damage that the system will receive. And so this work is motivated by several different examples of physical civil infrastructure destruction after extreme events. Specifically, when you're talking about microgrids in the power system, one of the main examples is the grid that was destroyed by hurricanes in Puerto Rico. It's still recovering from Hurricane Maria that happened in 2017, Hurricane Fiona in 2022, really destroyed Puerto Rico's power grid. When that Hurricane Fiona moved all the way up the Atlantic coast, and so it affected communities in Florida as well. But one example of a community that was resilient to the hurricane event was Babcock Ranch. It's almost completely solar powered community that has other designs in their civil infrastructure system, like raising roads and preventing storm surges that allowed the community to withstand the hurricane without losing power. So the overall goal of this work and this modeling effort is to better understand how power supply decisions can best support a community's civil and social infrastructure restoration after an extreme event. So the data that we use to model the community is the Clark community. It's a very detailed data set. We termed it the Clark community, or the customizable artificial community county. So what we're seeing here is one county, and it's the data behind this is representative of a community along the Atlantic coast in North Carolina. So we see the edge of the community here is actually exposed to the Atlantic Ocean. And so during extreme events like a hurricane, you would experience storm surge that would affect some of the civil infrastructure along the coast, and even farther into the county because of the river systems that are there as well. So this Clark community was developed to provide a means to validate and refine our resilience model without compromising potentially sensitive information on infrastructure vulnerabilities. So the data set contains realistic civil and social infrastructure systems, as well as hundreds of critical facilities and the interdependent relationships between the civil and the social infrastructures. This map in particular is showing the power system network. So we're seeing the transmission lines in the power system, as well as the lighter blue are the distribution lines. What's circled, the 4 red circles show the main power generation stations. When this model was first developed, we looked at just utilizing steam power plants or thermal power plants like coal or natural gas. So we're looking at what the power network before an extreme event. So all of the lines are open, serving power to the infrastructure like hospitals, healthcare, police stations. So the research that we conducted was to study how different energy technologies other than steam may be able to better serve the community after an extreme event. Our community is fundamentally composed of interconnecting infrastructure systems in addition to the power network, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So the Clark community is modeled as interdependent civil and social infrastructure systems. For the civil infrastructure systems, we consider power, the water distribution system, the transportation or the road network, the wastewater system, as well as communications. And we also consider 3 classes of social infrastructure systems. We consider public safety, which composes emergency medical services, police, fire, and rescue. We also look at or model critical commercial services, fuel distribution, banking, availability of ATMs for paying for food distribution and pharmaceuticals, and also community services like healthcare and hospitals, shelters, and government facilities. One of the main advances of this model is looking at how all of these infrastructure systems are interdependent. And they're classified as interdependent when one is dependent on the other. So for example, hospitals often have backup power supplies that can enable them to remain operational, independent of the power grid. So if there's an outage in the power grid, the hospital would still have power. But if that same outage in the power grid may be affecting the water pumping station and the water distribution network that provides the potable water to the hospital. So even though the hospital may have its own backup power, if it doesn't have the water that it needs, it won't be able to operate at full capacity. So these types of interdependencies are what are explicitly modeled in our optimization model. And in this study, we're looking at how we might redesign the power grid, or what different types of generation might best serve or support the restoration of the social infrastructure after an extreme event. So we're looking at 4 different types of technology. We consider wind, solar, battery storage, and nuclear. As I mentioned earlier, the Clark community relies on currently steam power plants to supply this energy need. We are looking at whether and how much of these different types of technologies might supplement or take the place of these steam power plants. Renewable variability in this optimization model is taken as hourly production across 2 representative weeks, one in the summer and one in the winter. And we model distributed generation. So even though we're looking at where we might place renewables or nuclear in the system across the entire county, we're still looking at pretty sizable units. So we're looking at as small as 2 megawatts a wind turbine, 1.5 megawatt solar array, and a 6 megawatt nuclear power, which would be classified as a small modular reactor, but these are even a microreactor. They, as previous presentation mentioned, these don't yet exist, but we look at the study to see what they might be able to contribute. So the decision is which type of power generation technology to deploy at what location, and that depends on the location of the power plant in the system. It depends crucially on the civil and the social infrastructure interdependencies nearest to the supply node. It also depends on the strength of the extreme event that the community is affected by, which leads to infrastructure damage expectations. And new in this study is the consideration of land constraints, or in other words, a truer representation of the space that's available for building these distributed energy systems. So in representing the land constraints for power generation expansion, we consider these criteria. We're looking at noise and odor constraints, distance to parks and other ecological sites of interest, distance setbacks from infrastructure, like setbacks from public roads, required setbacks from airports, and in the case of nuclear power, the size of the emergency planning zone required, as well as the slope of the land. So we look at the results under 3 different types of scenarios, or damage scenarios. The 3 damage scenarios that we model are representative of a Category 3 hurricane. So the first damage scenario is the 10th percentile of damage across the physical infrastructure. We look at a worst case damage scenario where 90% of the civil infrastructure is damaged, and an expected scenario where 50% of the civil infrastructure is damaged. The crisis model, or this restoration optimization model, is a mixed integer linear restoration model, and it's multi-objective. So we're maximizing the performance of the social infrastructure system, which is the public safety system, the commercial services, and the community services, while minimizing the cost of the new investment in the power system. This model is constrained by the damage that's inflicted on the civil infrastructure. So the power, the water, the transportation, wastewater, and communications networks. It's fundamentally a network optimization model. And we're looking, the multi-objective nature allows the decision maker to put different weights on different types of services available after an extreme event. This model has over 100 different constraints that are looking at the network interdependencies. So we have network flow constraints, but we also consider logical constraints within the network. So how a supply or demand may decrease or increase at a certain node in the network for a certain infrastructure as a result of damage from the extreme event. We look at interdependencies between the civil and the social infrastructure system, and the availability of that civil infrastructure to provide a service to a particular social infrastructure. We look at movement of supply from depots to distribution points, such as food or humans, and the operation of distribution centers. And we look at scheduling constraints for restoration crews. So the model is ultimately looking at how we restore and which infrastructure systems we target first in order to best support the social infrastructure. So the results that we have, the first damage scenario, where we're looking at the best case, we're looking at what community responses are likely to work best for a given disaster or damage scenario. In the bottom right here, we're seeing how specifically the power network is affected by our 10% damage scenario. Most of the power transmission and distribution lines are still available. And so we see investment on the top left, solar and battery. We look at the solar power system is distributed across the county, and the white areas in this graph are, excuse me. About that, the white areas in this graph are where you cannot build in the system. When we have a worse damage scenario, the 50% damage, we can see that on the left side of the community, most of the power network is out. And that's where we see battery systems come into play that are able to support the local civil infrastructure systems like police and healthcare. And in the worst case scenario, we see a movement of, again, a reliance on battery storage to support the social systems like fire, hospitals, and police. So overall, we're looking at a community determined restoration priorities for social infrastructure systems. And those are directly impacted by the optimal investment decisions for the physical and the civil infrastructure systems. The results across our damage scenarios underscore the importance of distributed energy resources to the restoration of social infrastructure. The decision depends a lot on the location of the damages, which is why we see different decisions based on the different damage scenarios, as well as the assigned priority of restoration and the optimal dispatch of crews. But in terms of the power network, we see renewable solar power plus battery storage is optimally managed to support community restoration even after extreme damage. Small modular reactor, modular nuclear doesn't come into play, mainly because it's 5 times more costly than solar and batteries, and it's severely limited by the planning zones as well as the availability of the power distribution lines to distribute that centralized power. I'll stop there. I look forward to questions. Thank you.
Right, Kristen, thank you very much. Thank you for this nice presentation about how to model this interaction between various power supply alternatives and the rare events or / disasters that can happen. We'll move on to our final speaker of today's webinar, and that's Marco Reimann. Marco received a PhD from the University of Vienna in Austria in 2003. He held positions at ETH Zurich and the Warwick Business School. He is now a full professor at the Production Operations Management group at the University of Graz, and he also has a position at Northumbria University in the UK. Mark is going to talk about repair in Austria, opportunities for operations research in the circular economy. Did I get that right, Mark?
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Fritz.
Okay. That's good to hear. Please go ahead, Mark.
Yes, and thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm excited to be here, and obviously also thank you everyone for joining this event today. So yes, so I will. Whoops, how do I move? Oh, there it is. I will talk about repair, and specifically repair in Austria, and NOR perspective on that. And this talk is based on joint work with a couple of colleagues back in Graz, which are listed on the bottom of this slide. First of all, maybe repair, where does it sit in a circular economy? And to just briefly show this, I have put here the quite infamous butterfly diagram from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. On the right-hand side, we see the loops of the non-renewable materials. And here it's quite easy to see that the repair sits in the very innermost loop of this circularity based system. So it's closest to the user and the use phase of these durable products. So it is a major contributor to the circular economy. But is it also sustainable? Well, if we look at the UN Sustainability Development Goals, then all of these aspects in terms of repair, but also remanufacturing or recycling, would fall particularly into the 12th goal, responsible consumption and production. But there are obviously links with some of the other of those goals as well. So having said that, let me move on to Austria. Austria is a small country, obviously about 9 million people in the heart of Europe, but it's kind of a pioneer in terms of at least public initiatives with respect to repair. And I've listed just a few. So, for example, in Graz, where I live, there is a repair network that is administered by the city. And it's kind of a conglomeration of companies that deal with repair in different kind of products. And the slide is in German, but I think the symbols are kind of self-explanatory. So there's everything from bikes over cell phones, furniture, textiles, shoes, leather goods. So it's a broad framework, and the goal is to make repair more visible to the final consumers. Also, several Austrian cities and federal states had offered repair fundings in the past. So, for example, in Graz, once again, there was a repair funding for electric and electronic equipment that started in 2017. And all of those have now, since April 2022, kind of been replaced by a new Austria-wide system for funding electric and electronic equipment, and that is based on a system that was used in Vienna before. And so there is a lot going on, and what we do is we are really right in the middle of that. So we work on the one hand side very closely with the city of Graz by being scientific advisors of this repair network Graz Repariert, but also by providing some kind of academic expertise to the city officials when it comes to redesigning their repair funding scheme. And I will briefly talk about that later. But we also work directly with repair and remanufacturing companies in optimizing their service operations, or also by providing structural insights on designing their reverse supply chains. And maybe what is important to say, so yes, this talk here is obviously for an OR community, but when we talk about our repair research, we really look at it from a broad perspective. So we've essentially done everything from qualitative empirical work all the way to analytical models, some of which I will talk about later. And we also believe that it's important to look at those different stakeholders and kind of, as I already mentioned, the policymakers, of course, the repair companies, but also the consumers. And so what we're doing is essentially trying to look at this from a very broad perspective. So we've done work on, as I just briefly mentioned, on the optimization of service operations, and just one example that is given there. I don't know how easy it is to read, but that's also not really necessary to read all those boxes. But one question is, for example, how can we obtain the best possible information about the defect before actually going to the customer site for repairing, say, the washing machine? And so we looked at different operational kind of configurations that such a company could use to do that. We also looked at the demand side, and I'm not going to say anything about this now because I'll have an example in a minute. We also looked at the reverse supply chain, and here obviously the question is, how do we get our hands on those products? How do we get our hands on spare parts, for example? And how do we reuse those products? And finally, we look at the infrastructure, and once again, this is something that I will talk about in a minute. So now I want to give you just two examples of this. The first one is on the demand side, and I mentioned we've done kind of broad research here, and this is particularly true for the demand side, where we really have done qualitative empirical work to understand how consumers perceive the service as it is now, all the way to a very recent work where we did a behavioral experiment on the optimal repair replacement decision of consumers for two products, namely a washing machine and the MacBook. And in between sits this kind of research where we looked at the willingness to pay for repair services and also the factors that most prominently contribute to the willingness to pay for repair. And here we did an adaptive choice-based conjoint analysis, also for smartphones and for washing machines. The results are based on a survey with residents in Styria. So this is the region in Austria where Graz is located. And we looked at some of the attributes that we had identified from previous research that are important. And I mean, these are not very surprising. So on the one hand side, it's the convenience of the repair service, and on the other hand, it's of course the price of the repair service. And just to specify this a little bit, so on the bottom of this slide, we can see typical results of such a conjoint analysis. On the left-hand side, we can see the relative importance of the different attributes that we measured for explaining the willingness to pay of consumers for those products. And we did this, as I said, for washing machines and for smartphones. And we also we looked at relatively cheap smartphones and relatively more expensive smartphones, and the same for washing machines. And as you can see, some of the attributes we looked at, and once again, these were identified from previous research. So we looked at, did the customer get a recommendation for going to this specific repair shop? Is this repair company part of a network, yes or no? Is it probably an authorized repair company, authorized by the original equipment manufacturer of the product in question? What are the opening hours of this company? How convenient is it to access this company, this shop, in terms of the travel time? How long does the repair take? What about the guarantees that are given? And then obviously the price. And doing all this, we can see, not very surprisingly, and this is a paper that is currently under review, and that's what also the reviewers said. Of course, the price has the highest relative importance of all those attributes, but that's not the point. The point is really to see which of those other attributes play a key role. And again, we can see that the more tangible ones, like the repair time or the travel time or the guarantee, obviously play the more important role, and things like recommendations or an authorization also to some extent might change the perception of those services, but rather to a lesser extent, even though they are mentioned quite frequently when you just ask consumers about their relevant factors. What we found interesting is the result with respect to the willingness to pay, because previous research essentially has shown or has claimed that the repair price is kind of a percentage value of the original price of the product. And we did not find that. So just to give you the identifier, so S300 stands for a smartphone that had an original price for 300, S800, a smartphone with a price of 800, W400, washing machine with an original price of 400, W800, washing machine 800. And we can see that even the best possible service that you could provide in terms of all those attributes would give you the willingness to pay shown, and quite clearly they are not percentage values of the original prices, but are rather relatively close to each other, or surprisingly close to each other. Yes, consumers are willing to pay a little bit more for repair of a more expensive product originally, but not in relation to the difference in the real price. And we have a couple of ideas why this is the case. We also mentioned it in the paper, but maybe just one point is that there is this one concept of mental accounting, and obviously the consumers may think not about the original value of the product, but at the residual value or the current time value of the product in making those decisions. So this is one variable that explains this result. On the very right-hand side, just very briefly, we show how for the 4 different product categories, a change in the repair time affects willingness to pay. And as expected, the longer repair time, the less are consumers willing to pay. But what is interesting is that the consumers of high price products are much more sensitive with respect to repair time than those who buy low price products. So this is an interesting insight from this one. To make sure that I stick with the time, I will move to the second example. And this is interesting because here the city of Graz essentially asked us, okay, we had this funding before. Now there is the Austria-wide funding. So to avoid redundancies, we will kind of stop our system. But what can we do with the money in the future to go ahead if we wanted to offer a funding again? And so we did kind of work with that. But essentially, what I'm showing now is we compared the city of Graz system as it was before with the Austria-wide system to understand what the differences are. And so here we use analytical modeling, and the main attributes essentially that we looked at was the two systems differ with respect to the responsibility for claiming refund. Whereas in the Graz-based system, consumers first had to pay the full repair price and then had to claim the refund from the regional government. In the Austria-wide system now, the consumers only pay the subsidized price, and then the repair companies have to claim the refund. There are also some other differences shown on the right-hand side of the slide. So the list of equipment is a little bit different, and the volume of the funding is a little bit different. But as I said, we looked at those two systems from the perspective of the repair company, and what we found is that, of course, the existence of the funding will induce the companies to increase their prices. So they will try to extract some of the extra profit that can be made. However, consumers always pay less. So this extra profit generated by the funding is somehow split up between the repair companies and the consumers. Comparing the two systems, we find that under the Austria-wide system, the prices is always larger than under the Graz-wide system. And finally, we find in terms of the optimal funding level, the Austria-wide system is actually preferable from the government or from regulators' perspective, because the optimal funding level is lower. And so this is just to give you a brief idea of what we did here. To summarize, and this is my last slide, I think this is an area where there's huge potential for impactful OR research. And the 2 points that I want to mention is that first, our observation is that repair companies, which are typically small and medium-sized enterprises, are very interested in collaborating with UNI. And so data are comparatively easy to get by. And on the other hand, on the consumer research, this is kind of fruitful because everybody has an opinion, and many people have a very strong opinion about repair, and you get a lot of this out of this interaction with consumers. And I will stop here. Thank you very much, and I look forward to questions.